An international row over the future of electronic cigarettes.
A group of scientists claims millions of lives could be lost if e-cigs are reclassified as a danger to health.
Good morning. First, our main story, and more than 50 leading scientists from around the world have signed a letter arguing that electronic cigarettes should not be regulated in the same way as tobacco.
Yes, they say that millions of lives will be lost if restrictions are placed on e-cigs because they are an important tool in helping smokers quit. The World Health Organization says it's still considering what regulation to recommend. Our health correspondent Jane Draper reports.
It's a booming business, but electronic cigarettes are controversial. Some users have found the battery-powered devices help them stop smoking. But doctors' leaders in the UK say there's not enough evidence that the products are safe. Health researchers who support e-cigarettes have now written to the World Health Organization ahead of crucial negotiations about tobacco.
We need regulation about safety, quality and content. These things are competing with cigarettes. These things can help people stop smoking, but if we over-regulate them, make them harder to obtain, then they're just not going to take off, just not going to be used to the extent that they should be, and we're going to miss out on a big public health opportunity.
The market in e-cigarettes has grown very quickly, but the Department of Health says that devices like these are not risk-free. And the Welsh Government wants to restrict their use in public places because it says they make smoking seem much more normal.
The World Health Organization says it's still considering what regulation to recommend to governments around the world. There are calls for tough controls on advertising e-cigarettes, and the arguments about them look set to continue. Jane Draper, BBC News.
Well, over the past 2 years, the number of people using electronic cigarettes in the UK has tripled to more than 2 million, and the majority use them to help them give up smoking.
But their growing popularity has sparked a fierce debate among scientists. Just how safe are e-cigarettes?
Yeah, we spoke to Vivienne Nathanson from the British Medical Association earlier on Breakfast, who is calling for them to be regulated and wants any advertising of them banned. She told us there was evidence children are starting to use them.
What the adverts are beginning to do is to make these things look as if they are something that's a desirable lifestyle product. And of course, if you're a smoker already of cigarettes, then it is clearly more desirable that you use e-cigarettes than that you smoke cigarettes. But if you're a non-smoker, and with this evidence that children are beginning to use them who've never smoked, then it may be that the adverts are influencing them, and that's extremely undesirable. And rather like cigarettes in the 50s and 60s, we really need to look at that, and I believe to ban it, to stop them from advertising in a way that attracts children.
Well, we can speak now to Professor Robert West from University College London, who, along with more than 50 other researchers, has signed that letter calling on the World Health Organization not to regulate electronic cigarettes. He joins us from our central London studio now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I don't know if you could hear what was being said in that clip just then, that the advertising of electronic cigarettes is potentially a bad thing.
Yes. So what we're calling for is not for them not to be regulated, quite the opposite, for them to be regulated appropriate to what they are. What the WHO looked as though they were proposing to do, and hopefully they won't do it, was to treat electronic cigarettes exactly the same as tobacco cigarettes. And they have a little bit of a history of treating all nicotine and tobacco products similarly and confusing people because, as the BMA spokesman said, electronic cigarettes, they may not be perfectly safe, but they're orders of magnitude safer than cigarettes, and so we need to take that into account. So we need really bespoke regulation, which I think would allow advertising, but wouldn't allow sale to under 18s, and the advertising would have to be directed at smokers.
Now, you argue that they're less harmful than real cigarettes.
Yeah.
But how do we know what the long-term effects of the nicotine intake are?
Oh, we know absolutely what the long-term effects of nicotine are because we have a natural experiment in Sweden where millions of people have been using a product called snus, which is a smokeless form of tobacco, which gives you very high nicotine levels, but without the tar and the toxic gases. And what we see is the lowest rates of cancer, smoking-related cancers, and we see if there is a risk of heart disease, it's very, very low. So nicotine itself, we know, is I wouldn't say relatively not harmless, but you know, orders of magnitude safer than smoking.
Do they actually help people to give up smoking?
The data are still coming in on that. We published a study last week in which we followed up just under 6,000 people who had used a number of different methods, including e-cigarettes, and we found that those people who used an e-cigarette were about 60% more likely still not to be smoking when we spoke to them than people who'd used nothing at all or a licensed product bought from a shop. Now, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily the best way for everyone, but they're certainly, I think, something that a lot of smokers are using and getting some benefit for.
I just want to put to you a message that we've had from one of our viewers on email this morning. Jane has emailed us and has said, "My 8-year-old grandson told me he wanted to try an e-cigarette after seeing an advert on TV. I asked him why, and he told me they're not dangerous." Now, at 8 years old, to have that type of information, to know that, isn't that a dangerous message to start sending to children?
Yeah, well, I mean, you obviously don't want children to be using e-cigarettes, but we also need to recognise that a tremendous number of children are going to take up smoking. And the evidence actually in this country is that there's very, very few people using e-cigarettes, let alone using e-cigarettes and going on to smoking at that age. In our survey, for example, we found 0.2% of people using e-cigarettes who hadn't smoked. So we're tracking it very closely, and obviously we need to look at it and monitor it. But at the moment, we really don't see a signal there.
Robert West, thank you very much indeed.